Imagine a world where every man on the frontier carried a six-shooter on his hip, ready for a duel at any moment. That's the story Hollywood has told us. But the truth? It's far more surprising.
Appears to do, yes.
Revolvers were expensive, unreliable, and often deadly, not just to their targets, but to their owners. Many cowboys couldn't afford them. Some weapons misfired catastrophically, and the bullets themselves were so weak they sometimes bounced off thick coats. So if revolvers weren't the trusty sidearms of every cowboy, what were they really? And why did they become the most legendary guns of the Wild West? Number 10. Most cowboys couldn't afford revolvers. Here's a truth that will blow your mind. The majority of cowboys roaming the Wild West never owned a revolver in their entire lives. While movies show every cowboy sporting a shiny six-shooter, the harsh reality was far different. A quality Colt revolver cost between $25 and $50 in the 1870s. To put this in perspective, that's equivalent to over $1,000 in today's money. The average cowboy earned just $30 to $40 per month, meaning a single revolver represented nearly 2 months' wages. Most working cowboys were broke, spending their meager earnings on basic necessities like food, shelter, and equipment for their horses. They couldn't justify spending 2 months' salary on a weapon they might never need to use. Instead, they relied on cheaper alternatives, like single-shot pistols, or more commonly, they went completely unarmed. The cowboys who did carry revolvers were usually ranch foremen, cattle barons, or those involved in the more dangerous aspects of frontier life, like law enforcement or gambling. Regular cowhands were far more likely to carry a rifle for hunting game or protecting cattle from predators than an expensive revolver for gunfights. This economic reality created a class divide on the frontier. Wealthy ranchers and businessmen could afford the latest firearms technology, while working cowboys made do with whatever they could scrape together. Many cowboys pooled their resources to buy a single revolver that the entire crew would share. The famous gun belt and holster setup you see in movies was equally expensive. A quality leather holster cost several dollars, and most cowboys wore simple rope belts rather than elaborate gun belts. The iconic image of the well-armed cowboy was more myth than reality for the vast majority of frontier workers. This shocking truth reveals how Hollywood has completely distorted our understanding of frontier life. The real Wild West was defined more by poverty and practicality than by glamorous gunfighters and their expensive weapons. But if you think that's surprising, wait until you discover the deadly secret that made some revolvers literally blow up in their owners' faces. Number 9. Chain firing could kill you with your own gun. Imagine drawing your trusted revolver in a life or death situation, only to have it explode in your hand, sending burning metal fragments into your face and potentially killing you instantly. This terrifying phenomenon was called chain firing, and it was one of the most deadly secrets of Civil War era and early Wild West revolvers. Chain firing occurred when the spark from one chamber accidentally ignited the gunpowder in adjacent chambers simultaneously. Instead of firing one bullet, multiple chambers would discharge at once, creating an explosion that could destroy the weapon and severely injure or kill the shooter. This nightmare scenario was most common with percussion cap revolvers, which dominated the early Wild West period. These weapons required loose gunpowder, lead balls, and percussion caps to be loaded separately into each chamber. If the powder wasn't properly sealed, or if sparks jumped between chambers, disaster could strike. The problem was so serious that experienced gunmen developed elaborate rituals to prevent chain firing. They would carefully pack each chamber with just the right amount of powder, seat the lead ball perfectly, and then seal the front of each chamber with thick grease or wax to prevent sparks from jumping between chambers. Many gunfighters would intentionally load only 5 chambers instead of 6, leaving the chamber under the hammer empty as a safety measure. This practice became so common that it gave birth to the expression 5 beans in the wheel, referring to loading 5 bullets in a 6-shot revolver. Some unlucky souls discovered this danger the hard way. Historical records document cases of men losing fingers, hands, or even their lives to chain firing incidents. The explosion would send metal fragments flying, often blinding or disfiguring the shooter permanently. The fear of chain firing was so prevalent that many experienced gunmen preferred older, more reliable weapons over newer models with uncertain track records. Trust in your weapon was literally a matter of life and death. But even if your revolver didn't explode, you still faced another shocking problem that Hollywood never mentions. If you're as fascinated by these hidden stories as we are, take a second to hit that like button. It's one of the best ways to let us know what kind of content you want more of. And if you're new here, consider subscribing. We've got plenty more deep dives into the myths and truths of the Wild West, and you won't want to miss them. Number 8. Bullets were incredibly unreliable and weak. The bullets fired from Wild West revolvers were so weak and unreliable that they often bounced off heavy winter clothing or failed to penetrate thick leather coats. The ammunition technology of the 1800s was primitive by today's standards, leading to shocking survival stories that sound impossible. Early Wild West revolvers typically fired round lead balls weighing between 90 and 130 grains, propelled by small charges of black powder. These projectiles had extremely low velocities compared to modern ammunition, often traveling at less than 700 feet per second from typical revolver barrels. The manufacturing quality of bullets was inconsistent and dangerous. Homemade ammunition was common, with many frontiersmen casting their own lead balls, using whatever materials they could find. This resulted in bullets of varying weights, shapes, and hardness, making accuracy and stopping power completely unpredictable. Black powder was equally problematic. It absorbed moisture from the air, causing misfires in humid conditions or during rain. The powder also produced enormous clouds of white smoke when fired, immediately revealing the shooter's position and making follow-up shots nearly impossible in any kind of wind. Historical accounts document numerous cases of men surviving multiple gunshot wounds that should have been fatal. One famous incident involved a gambler who was shot 6 times at close range, but walked away because the bullets lacked sufficient power to penetrate his thick wool coat and leather vest. The weakness of early ammunition meant that shot placement was absolutely critical. A bullet that might barely penetrate clothing could still be deadly if it hit a vital organ, but the same bullet might be completely ineffective if it struck bone or thick muscle. Many experienced gunmen compensated for weak ammunition by filing cross-shaped cuts into their lead bullets, creating primitive expanding rounds that would cause more damage upon impact. This practice was dangerous and often caused the bullets to tumble unpredictably. The unreliability of ammunition made backup weapons essential. Smart gunfighters carried knives, brass knuckles, or small hideout guns because they couldn't depend on their primary revolver to stop a determined opponent. But ammunition problems were just the beginning of the shocking technical failures that plagued these legendary weapons. Number 7. Revolvers, jammed constantly in desert conditions. Revolvers in the Wild West, jammed constantly due to the harsh desert environment, often at the worst possible moments. The combination of sand, dust, extreme temperatures, and primitive manufacturing created mechanical nightmares that could cost a man his life. Fine desert sand was the enemy of every moving part in a revolver. It would work its way into the cylinder mechanism, trigger assembly, and hammer action, creating a grinding paste when mixed with gun oil that could completely seize up the weapon. Many gunfighters found their revolvers completely inoperable after riding through sandstorms. The extreme temperature variations of the American West caused serious mechanical problems. Metal parts would expand and contract dramatically between the scorching heat of desert days and the freezing cold of desert nights. This constant expansion and contraction would throw off the precise tolerances needed for reliable operation. Cylinder timing was a constant problem that could make a revolver dangerous to its owner. If the cylinder didn't align properly with the barrel when the trigger was pulled, the bullet could strike the forcing cone at an angle, causing the weapon to explode or send fragments flying unpredictably. The primitive lubricants available in the 1800s were completely inadequate for desert conditions. Animal fats and plant-based oils would congeal in cold weather or run out completely in extreme heat, leaving metal parts grinding against each other and wearing out rapidly. Many experienced frontiersmen developed elaborate maintenance rituals to keep their weapons functional. They would disassemble their revolvers every night, clean every part meticulously, and reassemble them using minimal lubrication to prevent sand accumulation. The famous quick-draw duels of Hollywood were nearly impossible with jam-prone revolvers. Smart gunfighters carried multiple weapons and knew how to clear jams quickly. But in a real gunfight, mechanical failure often determined who lived and who died. Some gunmen resorted to carrying their revolvers in sealed leather pouches or wrapping them in cloth to protect them from sand and dust. This made quick access impossible, but ensured the weapon would function when needed. The reliability problems were so severe that many experienced frontiersmen preferred older, simpler weapons over newer, more complex designs. A gun that fired every time was worth more than one with advanced features that might jam when your life depended on it. But mechanical failures weren't the only shocking problem. The next revelation will change how you think about Wild West marksmanship forever. Number 6, most gunfighters were terrible shots. The legendary gunfighters of the Wild West were absolutely terrible marksmen, and most gunfights were decided by luck rather than skill. The romantic notion of precision, shooters who could hit a silver dollar at 50 paces, is pure Hollywood fantasy. Historical records and contemporary accounts reveal that most gunfights took place at distances of less than 10 feet. And even at these point-blank ranges, many shots missed their targets completely. The famous gunfight at the OK Corral involved 30 shots fired at close range, with only 3 men killed and 3 wounded, demonstrating remarkably poor marksmanship. The design of Wild West revolvers made accurate shooting nearly impossible. Most had crude iron sights that were barely visible, no adjustable rear sights, and triggers that required enormous pressure to fire. The heavy trigger pull would jerk the gun off target just as the bullet left the barrel. Ammunition inconsistency made precision shooting a matter of chance, with bullets of varying weights and powder charges producing different velocities. Even the most skilled marksman couldn't predict where his shots would hit. Each bullet behaved differently, making consistent accuracy impossible. Most gunfighters had no formal training and learned to shoot through trial and error. Unlike military personnel who received structured marksmanship instruction, frontier gunmen developed bad habits that reinforced poor shooting techniques. Many had never learned proper stance, sight alignment, or breathing control. The stress of actual combat made accurate shooting even more difficult. When faced with a life or death situation, our even experienced gunmen would suffer from tunnel vision, shaking hands, and rapid heartbeat that destroyed their ability to aim precisely. Most simply pointed their weapons in the general direction of their opponent and pulled the trigger repeatedly. Contemporary newspaper accounts often marveled when anyone was actually hit during gunfights, treating accurate shots as remarkable occurrences worthy of special mention. This suggests that successful hits were exceptional rather than expected. The famous fast draw competitions that developed later in the 20th century used modern ammunition, adjustable sights, and specialized equipment that was completely unavailable in the Wild West. These exhibitions have no relationship to the crude reality of frontier gunfighting. Many gunfighters compensated for poor marksmanship by getting as close as possible to their targets before shooting. Some would literally press their revolvers against their opponent's body before firing, eliminating the possibility of missing. But poor shooting was just one aspect of a much more shocking truth about how these weapons were actually used. Number 5. Revolvers were primarily clubs, not guns. Revolvers were used as clubs and bludgeons far more often than they were fired as guns. The practice of pistol whipping, or buffaloing, was so common that many gunfighters preferred it to actually shooting their opponents. The heavy weight of Wild West revolvers, typically between 2 and 3 pounds when loaded, made them devastatingly effective blunt weapons. A solid blow to the head with a revolver barrel could knock a man unconscious instantly or even fracture his skull. Many experienced fighters preferred this approach over the uncertainty of shooting. Pistol whipping offered several practical advantages over shooting. It was completely silent, avoiding the attention that gunshots would attract. It conserved precious ammunition, which was expensive and often unreliable. Most importantly, it was far more likely to incapacitate an opponent than the weak, unreliable bullets of the era. The technique was so prevalent that revolver manufacturers began designing their weapons with reinforced barrel construction, specifically to withstand the stress of being used as clubs. Some models featured heavy brass frames that added weight and durability for bludgeoning attacks. Many famous gunfighters were better known for their skill with a revolver as a club than for their marksmanship. They would approach opponents under the pretense of conversation, then suddenly strike with lightning speed using the heavy gun barrel. This technique required no ammunition and left no evidence of gunplay. Law enforcement officers particularly favored buffaloing because it allowed them to subdue suspects without killing them. A well-placed blow could knock a troublemaker unconscious without the legal complications that would arise from shooting an unarmed man. The term buffaloing came from the practice of stunning buffalo with clubs before slaughter, and the technique was considered an art form among experienced fighters. They would target specific points on the skull where a blow would be most effective while minimizing the risk of permanent injury. Some gunfighters carried specially modified revolvers with extended barrels or added weight specifically for use as clubs. These weapons were never intended to be fired, but served as sophisticated bludgeons disguised as firearms. The prevalence of pistol whipping helps explain why so many men survived Wild West gunfights. Many encounters that were reported as shootouts were actually brutal club fights, where revolvers were used as medieval maces rather than firearms. But the shocking misuse of these weapons goes even deeper than you might imagine. Number 4, most revolvers were never cleaned and became disease vectors. Most Wild West revolvers were never properly cleaned and became breeding grounds for deadly bacteria and disease. These weapons were literally crawling with germs that could kill their owners through infection, even if they were never shot. The harsh conditions of frontier life meant that proper weapon maintenance was nearly impossible. Cowboys and gunfighters spent weeks or months on the trail, without access to cleaning supplies, proper tools, or even adequate water. Their revolvers accumulated layers of dirt, blood, and organic matter that created perfect environments for dangerous pathogens. Black powder residue was particularly problematic because it was highly corrosive and absorbed moisture from the air. When mixed with blood from wounded animals or enemies, this created a toxic paste that ate away at metal surfaces while harboring deadly bacteria like tetanus and gangrene-causing organisms. Many gunfighters used their revolvers to dispatch wounded animals, getting blood and tissue deep into the weapon's mechanism. Without proper cleaning, this organic matter would decay inside the gun, creating horrific smells and dangerous infection risks. Some revolvers literally rotted from the inside out. The practice of carrying revolvers in leather holsters made the contamination problem even worse. Leather absorbed blood, sweat, and other fluids, creating a moist environment where bacteria could thrive. The combination of a dirty gun and a contaminated holster was a recipe for disaster. Historical medical records document numerous cases of men dying from infections caused by handling dirty firearms. Even minor cuts on the hands could become fatal when contaminated with the toxic residue from uncleaned weapons. Tetanus was a constant threat for anyone handling these filthy guns. Some experienced frontiersmen recognized this danger and developed crude cleaning rituals using whatever materials were available. They would use sand as an abrasive cleaner, animal urine as a solvent, and various plant oils as protectants. But these methods were often inadequate. The revolvers of famous gunfighters were often so contaminated that they became legendary for their horrible smells. Some weapons were so corroded and filthy that they were barely recognizable as firearms, looking more like rusted chunks of metal than functional weapons. Many deaths attributed to gunfights may have actually been caused by infections from handling contaminated weapons. The victim might survive the initial shooting only to die days later from blood poisoning caused by bacteria from the dirty revolver. But even clean revolvers harbored a shocking secret that could turn them into death traps. Number 3. Secret modifications turned revolvers into booby traps. Many Wild West revolvers were secretly modified with hidden mechanisms that could kill anyone who tried to use them, turning these weapons into sophisticated booby traps designed to protect their owners from theft or betrayal. The most diabolical modification was the installation of hidden secondary triggers or pressure plates that would cause the weapon to misfire or explode if handled by someone unfamiliar with the secret mechanism. These modifications were so cleverly concealed that they were invisible to casual inspection. Some gunfighters would deliberately weaken certain chambers in their revolvers, creating controlled failure points that would cause the weapon to explode if someone tried to fire it without knowing which chambers to avoid. They would mark the dangerous chambers with tiny scratches or other subtle indicators that only they could recognize. Modified firing pins were another deadly trap. Some weapons were altered so that the firing pin would only strike the primer correctly when the revolver was held at a specific angle or gripped in a particular way. Anyone else attempting to fire the weapon would experience misfires or dangerous hang fires. The most sophisticated modification involved installing false chambers that appeared to be loaded but actually contained explosive charges designed to destroy the weapon and injure the user. These booby-trapped chambers looked identical to normal ones but would detonate when struck by the firing pin. Some revolvers were modified with delayed action mechanisms that would cause the weapon to discharge several seconds after the trigger was pulled. This created confusion and danger for anyone unfamiliar with the modification, as they might relax their guard, thinking the gun had misfired. Hidden blade mechanisms were occasionally installed in revolver grips, allowing the owner to deploy a concealed knife, even if the gun portion of the weapon was disabled. These modifications required precise knowledge of secret pressure points or hidden latches to operate safely. The practice of booby-trapping weapons was so common among professional gamblers and notorious gunfighters that stealing someone's revolver became extremely dangerous. Many thieves were killed or maimed by the very weapons they tried to steal, not understanding the deadly modifications. Some modifications were designed to make the revolver completely inoperable to anyone except its owner. Secret locks, hidden safety mechanisms, or deliberately damaged parts would prevent the weapon from functioning unless specific procedures were followed. These deadly modifications created an atmosphere of paranoia where no one trusted any weapon except their own. Even picking up a dropped revolver could be potentially fatal if it had been booby-trapped by its original owner. But these intentional modifications pale in comparison to the next shocking revelation about revolver construction. Who would have guessed the reality behind this so-called legendary weapon? I'm curious what you think. Was the revolver more dangerous to its enemies or to the person carrying it? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We love reading your insights and might even feature one in a future video. And of course, don't forget to subscribe and join our growing community of Wild West enthusiasts. There's still so much to uncover. Number 2. Revolvers were made from recycled junk and could poison you. Wild West revolvers were manufactured from recycled scrap metal, including toxic materials that could slowly poison their owners through prolonged contact. The desperate demand for firearms on the frontier led to incredibly dangerous manufacturing practices that put users at deadly risk. During the chaos of the Civil War and westward expansion, legitimate gun manufacturers couldn't keep up with demand. Unscrupulous backyard smiths began producing revolvers using whatever metal they could find, including brass fittings from ships, lead pipes, and even church bells melted down for their copper content. The most dangerous revolvers were made from recycled railroad materials, which often contained high levels of toxic metals, like cadmium, mercury, and arsenic. These substances had been used in various industrial processes and remained embedded in the metal, even after reforging. Prolonged handling of these weapons could cause heavy metal poisoning. Many so-called gunsmiths had no formal training and relied on crude forge techniques that couldn't properly purify recycled metals. Impurities remained throughout the finished weapons, creating weak spots that could cause catastrophic failures, while also slowly poisoning anyone who handled them regularly. The grips of many revolvers were made from whatever materials were available, including treated woods that contained arsenic-based preservatives, lead-based paints, and various toxic dyes. Constant handling of these contaminated surfaces could cause skin irritation, neurological damage, and eventual organ failure. Some revolvers contained recycled ammunition components, including lead that had been contaminated with other toxic substances during previous use. This contaminated lead would create poisonous dust every time the weapon was fired, slowly accumulating in the user's lungs and causing lead poisoning. It contained dangerous concentrations of toxic materials. Historical medical records document numerous cases of mysterious illnesses among gunfighters and frontiersmen that can now be attributed to heavy metal poisoning from their weapons. Symptoms included tremors, memory loss, organ failure, and eventual death from toxic metal accumulation. The famous blue-black finish on many revolvers was often achieved using chemical processes that left toxic residues on the weapon's surface. These finishes would gradually wear off during handling, allowing direct skin contact with contaminated metal underneath. Some recycled revolvers contained materials from industrial equipment that had been exposed to dangerous chemicals during their previous use. These weapons were essentially toxic waste disguised as firearms, slowly killing their owners through chronic poisoning. But even this shocking revelation pales in comparison to the most mind-blowing truth. of all. Number 1. The most famous revolvers were actually fakes. The most legendary revolvers associated with famous gunfighters were complete fabrications, created decades later by con artists and museums desperate to cash in on the growing mythology of the American frontier. The revolvers displayed in museums and sold at auctions as belonging to legendary figures like Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, and Billy the Kid are almost entirely fake. These weapons were manufactured long after the Wild West era ended, artificially aged, and given false provenance stories to increase their value and historical significance. The practice of creating fake historical revolvers became a massive industry in the early 20th century, when Wild West nostalgia reached its peak. Skilled craftsmen would produce weapons using period-appropriate techniques, then subject them to artificial aging processes involving acid baths, controlled rust, and deliberate damage to make them appear authentically old. Many famous gunfighters never owned the specific revolvers now associated with them in popular culture. Wyatt Earp's supposed favorite Colt was actually owned by a completely different person and wasn't even manufactured until years after Earp's most famous gunfights had occurred. The serial number records that supposedly authenticate these legendary weapons were often forged or deliberately altered by unscrupulous dealers. They would change manufacturing dates, modify serial numbers, and create fake documentation to support their fraudulent claims about famous ownership. Some of the most celebrated revolvers in American museums are complete fabrications that never existed during the Wild West era. They were created by combining parts from different weapons, adding non-period modifications, and inventing elaborate backstories to explain their supposed historical significance. The famous fast draw exhibitions that popularized certain revolver models in the mid-20th century used specially modified weapons that bore no resemblance to actual Wild West firearms. These exhibition guns were precision instruments designed for speed and accuracy that would have been impossible to create with 1800s technology. Professional authentication of historical firearms is extremely difficult and often unreliable. Many experts have been fooled by sophisticated fakes, and some museums continue to display weapons they know are fraudulent because admitting the truth would destroy their credibility and financial value. The market for fake Wild West revolvers became so lucrative that entire workshops were dedicated to producing nothing but fraudulent historical weapons. These operations employed skilled craftsmen who could create convincing replicas that fooled even experienced collectors and museum curators. The shocking truth is that almost everything the public believes about specific Wild West revolvers is based on manufactured mythology rather than historical fact. The real weapons used by famous gunfighters were likely crude, unreliable tools that bore no resemblance to the romanticized firearms now displayed as authentic artifacts. Thanks for riding along with us through the brutal truths of the Wild West's most iconic weapons. If you enjoyed this adventure, give it a thumbs up and share it with a fellow history buff. And remember, there are still countless untold stories waiting to be revealed. So hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss our next deep dive into the frontier's forgotten secrets.